welcome to another episode of the So Are We Doing Life podcast. And today we have the amazing Kate. She is a certified coach and founder of Follow the Dopamine, and I will let her tell you more about herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be on. I'm Kate. I am a certified coach and mindset mentor for people who feel like something about them, something about their brains is broken, something is wrong, something that makes them different. And they're starting to look into why. And a lot of them are people like myself who they realize 30, 40, 50 years into life that these personality characteristics, these qualities that we have about ourselves that perhaps a lot of other people have told us are flaws, are things that we need to change about ourselves. We are now discovering, thanks to the internet and actually talking to more people, that, oh, we're actually autistic or ADHD or both, like myself. And finding that out can be a very difficult, like, difficult's not quite the right word. It can be a thing to process. And so I help people go through that time in their lives because it's a time where I was a couple of years ago. So I know it intimately.
Thank you. And actually that's what we are going to talk about today. Just the whole idea of what it means to be normal, what it doesn't mean to be normal. When people misdiagnosed. And I think ADHD is one of those things. And it's so funny to me because I feel like everybody wants to label all children that way, but then no one wants to label adults that way. And
Yep.
sometimes the children don't have ADHD and the adults definitely have ADHD. So it's like this weird in between.
Well, and a lot of people are now finding out, like I'm 40, so a lot of people who are about my age are finding out that they are autistic or ADHD, and it's actually because of their children. It's because they are finding these like characteristics, and specialists are looking in and trying to help figure out what's going on. And they're saying these things that are like the traits of ADHD, and then the parents are going, "Oh, wait, you mean that's not just part of how like humans are?" And it's like, well, actually, yes, it is part of how some humans are. And it's also this thing that we are labeling ADHD.
That's so true. And I think also like people in our age range, especially women, like you and I talked about this before, not in the episode, about how, when we were kids, having ADHD as a girl wasn't a thing. You had a behavioral problem, you
Yep.
know?
Yep. And boys, either half the time it was their ADHD, they can't sit in the seat. And other times it was, well, just boys will be boys. Just boys can do that. They can be hyperactive. We expect boys to be rambunctious, and we expect girls to sit nicely in their seats and to be quiet and be seen and not heard, in that old saying.
Yes, and when you go outside of that, then they start questioning everything, but then it's like we were in this time when they didn't really question the right things. And I think
Yep.
that as we move forward and we get more exposure, and I really feel like social media has changed so much of how we handle like
So
mental
much.
health and wellness in general because there's so much more awareness. People are talking about it. It's not that, and I think people are like, I hear people often say, oh, it's more, we see more people with ADHD. No, we don't. We're just talking about it more. We have more exposure now.
Get more exposure. It's the same thing as with left-handed people. Like at first, left-handed people were told that they were wrong. Like schools legit used to punish kids who would try to do anything with their left hand. They'd slap them with the ruler, they'd get punished with that. And so they basically beat out their natural tendency to write with their left hand. And then when society started to shift and become at least a little bit more accepting of the fact that some people are left-handed, it was like all of a sudden there's all these left-handed people out there. And it's like, no, they were always there. They were just squashed down or attempted to be squashed down by society. And a lot of that, in my opinion, is because humans are not great at being uncomfortable anymore, like especially in today's day and age. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable. So
And I feel like when you're comfortable being yourself, like as a person, as a human, sometimes that makes people who are not uncomfortable being themselves even more uncomfortable. And I don't even think they recognize it. Like they think they're just upset. And they're not even upset because you're different. They're just upset because they aren't ready to be in that space,
yep,
you know? And
absolutely.
but I also think again, going back to social media, I think that also helps in that realm. And speaking of social media and like how you run your business and how you like how has that changed with you being diagnosed or well, I don't know if we really would call it diagnosed, but you becoming aware as an adult, you know?
Yeah. So what I noticed happening was like my entire life, I've gone, oh, I can kind of see some characteristics for being autistic. And then like I would look into some of the diagnostics and I would talk to specialists and what have you. And I would be told that no, I'm not autistic because I can make eye contact, I can socialize, I can do all of these things. I have socially acceptable special interests. And as social media has gotten more and more prominent in our lives, we are now hearing more and more information directly from people who are autistic or who are ADHD or who are whatever it is that we want to talk about here, mental health, anything along those lines. We're hearing directly from the people themselves as opposed to other people's interpretations of what they are seeing and experiencing. And so when we can actually talk to these people like ourselves, talk to other people, and we find that we have these similarities, it can in a way almost feel like coming home, like, oh my God, I'm not weird. I'm not abnormal. Well, I am weird and I am actually a-okay with that, but like it becomes its own thing. It's almost like you get permission in a way to be like, I don't have to change myself, not in those ways. Those things aren't actually like, there may be some things that are disabling about it for sure. And other things, it's just part of my personality. Like, I'm an honest person. I am a straightforward person. You ask me my opinion, I'm going to give you my opinion because you asked. And a lot of people look down on that. A lot of people expect like social rules of no, no, you lie to protect their feelings. And I think we're seeing more on social media and more in people now today too, where we're realizing we don't actually have to take responsibility for somebody else's emotions. Someone being uncomfortable because we are being ourselves does not mean we should stop being ourselves. It means the other person needs to learn how to handle discomfort. Now, whether they will or won't, that's up to
That's
each
on
individual
them.
person, I guess.
Yeah. And I think I really feel like that's really important to note that because I'm sorry, let me rewind. I think it's really important to note that um, we have people on social media speaking about their experience because again, it's all about those boxes, right? Like everybody wants to fit everything in a nice, neat little box because again, that's comfort. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about, especially autism, people have this very rigid idea. And if you identify or verbalize or say anything like I'm autistic, they're like, no, you're not, because you can do all these things. And they
Yeah,
don't understand that each person is individual. That's just like when you get a cold.
yeah,
Everybody's cold isn't exactly the same, but not saying I'm not saying that I'm not trying to minimize it when I say that, but I'm saying
I
like
get
just the
it.
difference is like people want everything to be exactly the same, and it's very hard for them to understand that it's not exactly the same. And I think that the more we get that awareness out there and the more that people start speaking about it and speaking about their experience, I think the better and more open and more perceptive people will be to, hey, this is the reality, not what I thought.
Yeah, and it takes, I mean, it takes emotional intelligence. It takes maturity to be able to be like, oh, I have this belief about something my entire life, and I never really questioned where it came from. And now I'm starting to think maybe I should question where that belief came from. Maybe there is new information that I could take in and change my opinions on things. Like when we get so attached to like our identity and what we think our identity is, that's when we start to push away anything that wants to object to that, anything that wants to kind of change that for us. It's uncomfortable. It makes us uncertain.
And do you think that there's a big difference between being diagnosed as a child as opposed to being diagnosed as an adult?
Oh, there's a huge, huge difference. And I mean that mostly well, I mean that in a lot of different ways, actually. So this is something that I find to be really interesting in that as I started to research like autism and ADHD and everything more and more and more, I'm looking at it going, I am choosing this label for myself because this identifies, this resonates with me. This label fits. It's a label that I am essentially choosing for myself to explain some things to myself. Now, children often are only diagnosed when there is some kind of behavioral issue that is bringing it to someone's attention. So getting diagnosed as a kid is it's both a blessing and a curse, as is getting diagnosed as an adult, in that yes, now you have like this understanding, but you also have other people's definitions of what those things mean, and they are going to tell you what those things mean. So you're going to grow up being told you can't do that because you are autistic. You can't do that because you're ADHD. Your disability isn't going to let you do that. Anything along those lines. Those are a lot of the things that people hear growing up when they are diagnosed as children, and they're not true. They're not helpful. They're very limiting sort of beliefs, and it almost cages people in. It keeps them from reaching more of their potential because they're being told that they are this label and that this is what having that label means. And as adults, I know a lot of people, when they're late diagnosed, go through like a mourning period of how could my life have been different and how could my life have been easier if people would have realized this as a kid and helped me make accommodations. And first of all, it's a very valid feeling, and it's something that we need to feel and process without judging. And what I like to remind people is that growing up 30 years ago didn't have the information about autism and everything that we have now. So it wouldn't actually, like, if, and maybe it would have helped us. It's also just as likely, if not more likely, that it wouldn't have helped us to be identified then, because maybe we wouldn't have grown up and be able to do all of the things that we actually can do now had someone told us before that we're autistic and that means we can't.
I think that's a valid point because even when we were children, when we were younger, they did even call like the way they labeled autism was even different. You're either high functioning or low functioning and like nothing in between. And what
Yep.
does that even mean? High functioning, low functioning, you know?
Well, yeah, it doesn't, it's not big terminology in the neurodivergent community anymore, in like the autistic community, because a lot of high functioning and low functioning is perceived from other people. It's how well do they perceive that you are, quote, functioning as a person, and especially in America, as a productive member of capitalistic society. And it doesn't, like, a lot of people who appear high functioning are actually just really good at masking. They're really good at covering up these traits, covering up the accommodations that they need. And they're simple accommodations. Like, I was reading something the other day that was talking about how much would it actually really help all employees of a business if meeting notes happened, like a summary after, especially now that we have AI and it can summarize these things for us. Having like clear set expectations helps everybody. It doesn't just help the people who need it. It's similar to how there's a lot of like accessibility things out there, like I'm going to say closed captioning, for example. I'm not deaf. I use closed captioning all the time on everything. I have it on this call that we're on right now because I visually process a lot better than I process auditory. And so for me, seeing the captions is what helps me like keep up with the conversation and keep going. And it's what helps me understand like on TV. So having like these accommodations, having these things that people can use, it benefits the core group of people who need it, and it benefits everybody else around them in various ways depending on what they need. And so I think that, at least I hope, that now that more people are realizing that they're autistic or that they're ADHD or whatever it is, that there was a lot of misdiagnosis that was happening before. I know I have been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. I think there were a couple other in there that I don't really remember now. And guess what? I'm actually autistic and ADHD. And so, yes, there is anxiety, and yes, there is depression. And it's also so much more than that. So, any of your, like the general treatments that are out there for it may not actually be as impactful if we aren't really looking at why that depression's going on. Like, why is that anxiety coming up along those lines? And yeah, I started going to go on this whole like hyper trail, so I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's almost like we're putting a band-aid on it. We're treating
Oh,
the symptom, but we're not treating the problem, you know? And I
exactly.
think, and I also think that's kind of a approach that we need to pay attention to as well, is we're treating it. We don't have to treat it. We just have to teach people how to be okay and be live a life that is okay for them and healthy for them while having whatever it is. And I think that these all fall into, like, you and I have again had, I would sometimes I wish we could just record our conversations because we've had some really good conversations
Yeah.
outside, and I'm like, oh, we should have recorded this. But you and I have talked about being neurodivergent and what that means. And I think that this is like a whole new wave of waking up. And I would really like for you to share your insights on how you see neurodivergent and neurodivergence. Like, explain the whole thing because I
Okay.
think it's really good for our audience to understand that.
So neurodivergent, just to put it really blanket, like the basics of it is you have neuro, which means mind, like our nervous system. And then you have divergent, which means diverging from what is considered typical. So a neurodivergent is a single person, one person, whose brain diverges from what is considered normal. It's not a diagnosis, it's an umbrella term. The idea is that if you have any kind of brain that is outside of what has been deemed normal by society, and I really do like to put normal in quotes when I say that, then you can choose to identify as neurodivergent. And underneath that neurodivergent umbrella, there's a number of conditions that fall under it. You'll hear a lot of people using neurodivergent to mean autistic or ADHD. And I know for a lot of people, that is because saying I am autistic and ADHD is like, it's this whole thing. It's just so much simpler to have this one word that describes it, right? The problem is that's misleading because there's a whole host of other conditions that fall underneath that neurodivergent umbrella, like OCD, um, borderline personality disorder, dyslexia, dyscalculia, also trauma, PTSD, CPTSD. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on of these things that are considered to fall under the neurodivergent umbrella. And another area where people kind of get a little bit confused with some of this language is that you have neurodivergent, neurodiverse, neurodivergence, and neurodiversity. And they all serve their own purpose, and people use them interchangeably, which isn't accurate, especially grammatically, if we want to get into it. So a lot of people will say, I'm neurodiverse. It's like, you're not, because a single person cannot be diverse in their neurotypes. We have one brain. So therefore, we are neurodivergent as individual people. People as a whole are neurodiverse, and that includes the neurotypical, the brain that's been considered normal, because the sorry, got a notification. It distracted me completely. Um, Neurodiverse is a group of people, meaning it is a group of people with a variety of brains. So it includes the quote unquote neurotypical, as well as any of the brains that might fall underneath the neurodivergent umbrella. My personal theory, what I think is going to happen, is that we are going to discover more and more neurotypes, meaning types of brains. And it'll be interesting to me to see how society changes maybe as we learn more about the different potential and still very normal variations in the human brain. And neurodiversity in general is this idea that people are different, brains are different. And it's really confusing. And there are slight differences between the words, but the biggest thing that I want to stress is that neurodivergent is a single person and neurodiverse is a group of people.
And I love the way that you say that you think we're going to like they're going to discover that there are different neurotypes, because I often wonder, especially now that, we're becoming more aware, are people who are neurodivergent, quote, is there really something? I feel like, what if that's just a type? Like, what if that's just who they are? What if we're so busy trying to make them fit that we don't realize that this is just an actual, like, a whole nother branch of the neuro tree, you know?
Absolutely. And I know that like I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and it's a very personal decision how you want to label, like what label you want to use for when it comes to your brain. And I think what's important for people to understand is that autism, neurodivergent, ADHD, any of these things, they don't necessarily have to mean bad or worse or less than in terms of what we have considered to be normal up until now. It's just different. It's just a different way of looking at and thinking about things. And if we look at like humanity as a whole, having all of these different types is actually what makes us stronger as a species and will help us move forward in general because we can complement each other. We can fill in where one person maybe has more weaknesses, someone else with those strengths can fill in and complement each other. And then vice versa, that person who has strengths in this other person's weaknesses, that's probably flipped. Maybe the other person has weaknesses where the other has strength. And it's really confusing the way that I just spat that out, but I hopefully the point got
No,
across.
no, I think that was actually a really good way to explain it, because you know, especially here in the US and Western cultures, we work really on the idea of individualism. We want everyone to be individual. But when you think about it, what makes us be able to function is having a team, a lot of times is having a team and being able to work productively. And if we all thought exactly the same way, if we all did things exactly the same way, we would never get anything accomplished. We need those people who are thinking outside, especially when you have like something new, right? And we need those people thinking outside of the normal expectations box. We need someone who is able to see what everybody else isn't able to see. And I think the only way to do that is if our brains are, you know, doing different things. If we're all doing
Yeah.
the same thing, we would all have just this boring black and white world where nothing ever changed or progressed.
Yeah, and something that like relates to that to me and is something that I learned as I was learning that I am autistic and everything. There's different ways of processing. And so I'm going to throw a little bit of terminology out there and I promise I'll do my best to explain it. There's top-down processing and there's bottom-up processing. And now humans as a whole, we do both. Most like we do both. However, there tends to be one that we lean more toward than the other. And so top-down processing is when you're going to look at something and you're going to figure out what to do with it based on what you have experienced before when it comes to that item. You're looking at basically the big picture, and any of the details might kind of weigh you down. The details, they're not part of the story for you yet. You need to get the big picture before you can worry about the specifics. And that is generally speaking the allistic, meaning the non-autistic way of thinking. That's how a lot of non-autistic brains tend to function. Now, a lot of autistic brains, on the other hand, brains like mine, we tend to function more on the bottom up processing, which means all of those details, we are looking at those details, and that's what tells us the story for the big picture. The details, we look at them and we go, oh, I wonder if this could function this way because they look really similar. We're not, the best way to think of it is like let's take a typewriter because that's just the item that popped up into my head right now as I'm staring at my MacBook. So let's take a typewriter, for example. So a top-up processor is, I'm sorry, a top-down processor is going to come up to that typewriter and no, okay, I've typed on this before. I'm going to write a letter. A bottom-up processor could come up and go, like, let's say that they've never seen a typewriter before, for example, and be like, oh, I wonder if I could use this typewriter in a way that is maybe outside of how a typewriter is generally used, because they're looking at the specific details that are involved in the typewriter. Did that explanation make sense?
It does actually, because yeah, that's actually a really good way to describe it.
It,
Um,
it gets the outside of the box thinking.
for sure. And again, like I feel like that's what this all I feel like wellness in general, especially in the US, is really we have to take a new approach because the old approach was not working. And we missed a lot of things and we didn't really take care of people because we dismissed it, you know? We refused to acknowledge it. And I'm not sure if it was a refusal to acknowledge just for lack of knowledge or, something else or a combination. But I mean, it
A
doesn't
whole
matter at
host of
this point,
reasons.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But what matters, I think, is really important is to have conversations like this and talk about those things because the more awareness that we get, the more people can start analyzing, like even themselves and realizing, okay, wait a minute, maybe I just think that I'm this or I
Yeah.
think that I'm that, and there's something else going on.
And outside of that as well, like I have a friend that I talk to. She is one of my best friends. She is not autistic and I am. And so we have had a lot of conversations that have had to happen in order for our friendship to continue and like the as strong as it is around what do we need at this moment to be comforted? What is it that we need from our friend in this scenario? Because often there are differences about what people need. And I mean this outside of autistic versus non-autistic. That's just the quickest example that I could come up with. So often we assume that other people want things the way that we would want them. And when they don't act that way, when they don't live up to that expectation, we say that something is wrong with them because they're not doing things the way that we would do. And that's an assumption that it's the same reason that like someone sends an email and it just says okay with a period. Some people might read into that like that person's mad at me. That person is angry at me because all they said was okay, right? You're making this assumption, this mind read that that's what that person meant. And you might go on that assumptions and then be like, oh, that person is just so mean. They're just so like rude. They don't really like take the time. They don't care about me. You're telling yourself all these stories about what it means. And if you were to actually talk to them, what if it was just they were in a hurry and they just needed to get that sent out and they were just answering it? Nothing was actually intended behind giving a short answer. If we make assumptions, this is when we go down the road of conflict and people not meshing together. When we take the time to actually be like, hey, is anything going on that I need to be aware of? Actually having that conversation, we get to know what is actually going on for the other person and not have to assume. It just puts us in a better place. It's like if your friend is having a problem and you are a problem solver, I'm a problem solver. So when my friend is having a problem, I want to jump in and be like, all right, we can do X, Y, Z. Which of these do you think makes the most sense? My friend, on the other hand, might be like, I just want to deal with the emotions right now. I just, I need to acknowledge what I'm feeling kind of thing. I'm not worried about the details, this like the actions of what I can do, all that will come later. I need to worry about my emotions right now. We just need to have these conversations and realize the people that we are talking to, what it is that they need. Let them actually tell us instead of assuming, and vice versa. Actually tell what it is that you need instead of expecting people to read your mind.
And also having a deeper understanding and accepting what they say because it's like we can have the conversation, but if we refuse to acknowledge it, refuse to accept that this is how that person is feeling, then we're still not doing them any justice, we're not, it's not helpful.
We're not doing ourselves justice either.
That's very true. So in your business, you work with, explain to me how you work with people in your business, because I know that this is plays a big role in that, right?
Absolutely. So the way that I work with my with people in my business is entirely individualized. And what that means is, generally speaking, you ask me a question, and my answer is going to be, well, that depends, because I can go down this whole host of avenues of different ways that things might have fit together. And I need to know specifically from you what is in your situation, what's happening on those lines. How can we get down to the root cause? How can we look at your problem or look at your challenges, look at your situation in a different way, maybe a way that you haven't thought about it yet, to kind of get out of the stressed, closed off, in scientific words, the foveal view, our closed off view. How do we get you into more of an expansive where you can start to see possibilities? And that's what I help people do. And I don't do it in a one size fits all kind of approach. I don't have a XYZ process that you go through, because it entirely depends on you and what you need at this point in your life, and what I can do for you. And so in general, a lot of what I do with my clients is kind of brainstorming. It's hearing their stories. It's thinking about what are some other ways that we could look at that. Maybe it's stop asking why you're feeling a certain way and trying to solve your feelings, and actually get out of your head and get down into your body and feel your feelings and process your feelings. It all kind of varies along those ways. But the main part of it is I help people understand what their strengths are, and I encourage them to work with their own energy patterns, so that instead of blaming and shaming themselves for not being able to live up to the expectations that they feel like other people have, to not be able to do the 40-hour work week, which is, in my opinion, an incredibly outdated way of thinking in general. It's sometimes people don't realize that they need this kind of permission in order to get to choose themselves and to be themselves. And so I guess in a way you could say I give my clients that permission. It's not really my place to, but I help encourage people. And part of that is by being authentic, by being myself, by embracing the human experience. It's not running from any specific emotions. Like, another thing that I teach my clients is that emotions are not good or bad. They're not positive or negative. They are energy and they are information. And so when we look at them that way, they no longer become something that we have to run from or try to avoid. They become something that we know we are capable of handling when they arise again, because those emotions are part of the human experience.
Do you find that when people come to you, that do you find that you have a lot of people who didn't realize like this was something they discovered in adulthood?
The majority, yes, especially at this point where I am in my business, that is the kind of specific niche, if you want to use that language, that I am focusing in on. It's the people who are just now realizing these things about themselves. It's the people who, maybe part of what I'm attempting to do is branch out more to people who don't know these things about themselves and are still beating themselves up. They're still trying to work in ways that are not helpful or natural to them. And I'm trying, so it's an interesting combination of both. I'm narrowing in on people who are just discovering these things about themselves. Maybe they're questioning if they want to go get diagnosed or not. Like I am self-diagnosed. I have had a lot of professional opinions that like weigh into it, and I have never actually personally sought official diagnosis for a few different reasons. And so for that reason, I also want to help people who don't use these terms and still feel like a lot of what they are doing is forcing themselves to work in ways that are not actually helpful to them.
That was actually going to be my next question because I realized that a lot of people like, especially again in our age range, there's a stigma attached to this.
Mhm.
And I think that we have to really move away from it, be that stigma. Just like think it's just like mental health and therapy. How long, even now, we still have some stigmas around getting therapy.
Oh
But
yeah.
like even 10, 15 years ago, if you were seeing a therapist, you kept it a secret because you didn't want anybody to know because it was a horrible thing. And I
Yeah,
kind of feel like this is where we are again. Here we are again looking at things that are just a part of who people are. And we're like, oh, you're just, that person is just not a good person. And it doesn't mean that. But I mean, we have to have those conversations. We have to have that awareness
yeah.
around
I mean,
this.
until 11 years ago, the diagnostic manual that psychiatrists are using to diagnose still said that you cannot be both ADHD and autistic. It was considered to be opposite of things. And we now know that is not true, that, you can be both. There's some studies out there that are saying that ADHD and autism are the same thing, just different sides of the same coin kind of thing. And it's just the thing with science is that science is amazing. And science is also an art. It takes a lot of trial and error. It's also figuring things out, and it's learning and growing. It's change. It's evolving. It's not a stagnant thing. It's not a one and done thing. Just like life for us, like it's life is change. Everything is change. The only constant in life is change. Everything evolves, everything grows. I mean, look at the trees around us outside, especially if you are on the East Coast like I am. The leaves, they're on the trees, they're green, and then they change color, and then they fall, and then the trees don't have any leaves, and then the next season comes around and the leaves start to grow again. Like this is just these
A
are
cycle.
cycles and these are changes that naturally happen. Humans also need to change and grow and learn from our past, learn from the things that didn't go the way that we wanted them to go. What kind of information can we learn from there? What can we do better next time?
And do you think that the uh, okay, I want to say that do you think I was going to ask you if you thought the baseline of the definition changed, but instead I really want to know, do you think that there is a baseline to ADHD or autism or anything else? Like I feel like there's really not one. We want there to be one, but there's not.
No, it's not that black and white, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Like there's a lot of nuance in there. And there's a lot of like that gray in there. I think that part of what also makes it hard to say is there a baseline is that a lot of the traits for ADHD, for autism, they're human traits. It's a matter of the scale at which we experience them or the intensity at which we experience them. That is kind of more where the differences are. And so that's where you get a lot of it's too hard trying to think of how I want to word this. It's not so straightforward as to be able to say you have characteristics XYZ, therefore you are this diagnosis, because the way that it presents in everybody is different. The way that it presents day to day is different. I mean, minute to minute, what I feel capable of changes. So it's a really blurry line between what is just part of the human experience and what is specifically due to this difference in my brain structure or what have you. And where do all of the different pieces and parts come together, right? Like we all contain multitudes. We are more than just one thing. And so where like how do all of these like puzzle pieces fitting together for one person, they fit together different for somebody else, and it one impacts the other without realizing it. It's just we don't fit into the neat boxes that would
that we want that people want
more
us to.
understandable. Yep.
I find it so fascinating because we always want to make everything simple for humans, right? Like we want everything to be this simple definition, but like humans ourselves are complicated. We
So
don't even
complex.
understand fully how we work, how our brain works,
Like
but we
neuros
want to make,
oh sorry.
no, go ahead. Neuroscientist.
Well, they say that they estimate right now that 90 to 95% of what we do is unconscious. Like we are not even aware of our motivations behind things. So, like, how would we?
That's so funny because if you think about it, like a perfect way to describe that, especially for like commuters, long commuters, right? You get in your car, you turn on the radio, whatever you're going to listen to or not, but you get in your car and the next thing you know, you're home.
You're
And
on
how
automatic
many
pilot.
times, right? And how many times have you just, it's almost like you're tapped out. And if you think about it, you're like, oh my goodness, I don't even know what was happening, how I got here. And but we don't even realize that we're just going through the motions. We're not less aware when we're driving. We're just less aware of in the moment because it's just
Exactly. We're not in the
natural.
present moment.
Hmm.
We're often in our heads, in our thoughts, about the future, like anxiety of the future, worry about the future, anxiety, like reliving the past. A lot of humans are just so stuck up in their heads. And I am so guilty of this. Like we get so caught up here that we kind of forget almost to pay attention to everything else that's happening. And that's why like that kind of living automatically, that not questioning the things that we think, having a thought doesn't make it true, just means that we had a thought. We are the ones who then attach meaning to that thought for ourselves. Like those are the things that, well, they keep us more easily led like sheep. That's number one. And it's just, they're the things that keep us from evolving and from growing and all, really, in my opinion, from being happy. Inability to be in the present moment, I think, is the biggest thing that makes people unhappy.
And do you think as we make more discoveries, how do you think social media and just like exposure is going to play a part in how we discover those things too?
I find that to be a hard question to answer because, especially like, I don't know what the future of social media is going to be in terms of the companies that own these platforms, the ever increasing change toward more and more capitalism. It's hard to say how social media is going to continue to impact people when I feel like it's entirely possible that social media one day is going to actually be something you have to pay to be a part of, like they're just in general. So, because it's privately owned by an individual company. However, humans, we're crafty people. We are innovative people. So maybe it won't be social media as we know it now, and there will still be some form of social media because there's going to be more and more people who are insisting on getting information out there one way or another. I think, I mean, we look at like the version of social media of sorts in our parents' age, for example, a lot of it was newspapers.
Hmm.
A lot of it was like the news reports. It was very specifically chosen what information it was that we were going to receive. Social media has now kind of opened that up where there's not as much control over what kind of information we receive, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It means there's a lot of false information out there too. It's no longer like enough to just be like, this came from like a website. So now you have to look at what website. How is
Yeah,
that
who
source
is
of
that person?
information? Like, yeah, like you got to go down a little bit more of that rabbit hole if you want to trust some of the information. And so I think humans will always find a way to share information. How we share that information, that is what's going to change as technology changes, as time goes on. And hopefully we will find ourselves with more, like I've seen some companies do it in a more neuroaffirming kind of way, meaning that they're more accessible for all brain types. They are worrying about the needs for all brain types, not just like one specific brain type. I think the more things like that happen, the more access to other people who speak up about these things about themselves. Like I shortly after I found out that I was autistic and ADHD, I had started saying it in like every conversation that I was having. It was a little bit over the top at the time, I'm not going to lie, but I was processing that all of this was going on. And I had a boss who it made him uncomfortable when I used those terms to describe myself because you don't talk about that at the workplace. You don't actually want people to know that. If they know that, then you're not gonna be able to move ahead kind of thing. I think I hope more of that is going to shift so that it just kind of becomes something to figure out about yourself naturally, as opposed to something that we're not figuring out now as adults, if that makes sense.
That does definitely. Um, I I have one more question for you. How do you view, it's kind of a two-part question. How do you view yourself and others? Because I feel like I know personally from our conversations, I know that you see yourself as very like there's that gray in between, right? You don't see yourself as any one or other thing, black and white. But how do you perceive others who, or how, let me rewind and rephrase my question. What is your advice for people who, especially adults who are diagnosed later on in life with autism or ADHD? Because I think I think it's kind of hard probably for people sometimes. Like I think especially if you go your whole life thinking something and then your whole life you've been told all of these horrible things about yourself because you were
What they,
not diagnosed. Yeah.
yeah. Well, my advice for those people is the same thing as my advice for everyone. Everybody is different. We have some similarities, but none of us are exactly the same as each other. And that's a beautiful thing. That is something for us to embrace and celebrate. And approaching yourself with openness and acceptance, love yourself, like care about yourself, actually choose yourself, choose like um put your needs first because your needs matter. And when we have a better connection with ourselves, we are better able to connect with other people. So by doing the work on ourselves to dig into these things that we're having issues with, to actually look inside and to take that courage and be that vulnerable to do that inner work, to do that healing, to help yourself out, you are then helping everybody else by doing that. So it kind of removes it's not selfish to love yourself. It's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's you cannot pour from an empty cup. So take care of yourself first so that you are able to take care of those that you love. And a lot of that means question some of these things that you think. Question some of the definitions for labels and words that you have. Question your beliefs around things. And this doesn't mean to go crazy and go down like a rabbit hole unless you want to, in which case, knock yourself out. It's just don't take every thought you have as fact. Yeah, actually, I think I'm just going to summarize it with that. Don't take every thought you have as fact.
I love that. I think it's all really great advice. Thank you again for joining us. I would like you to tell everyone how they can get in touch with you, how they can work with you, because I feel like you'll a lot of people like you can help a lot of people navigate themselves, which is so funny to say that, but it's true. You have to sometimes we need help navigating ourselves.
With the one phrase that I hear a lot in the coaching industry is that you can't see the label from inside the jar.
I love
So
it.
we're inside the jars, we cannot, there's some things that we just cannot see about ourselves because we're so inside our own situation, inside our own problem. And so having someone else who's outside of that jar, if you will, to help you is invaluable, in my opinion. It can be a friend, it can be a coach, it can be a therapist. It truly just having someone to help you identify some of these things can be very helpful. So as for like how to find me, I am at followthedopamine.life. So that's a website, www.followthedopamine.life. I am also on a lot of different social medias with the handle at followthedopamine.life, usually depending on their rules about what characters I'm allowed to put in my screen name. Um, but generally, that is how to find me. And if you go to my website, you will see everything that I'm up to, any events that I may have, any of the services that I'm offering. I offer one-on-one coaching. I am working on developing some group coaching programs. I will be doing some seminars and webinars and everything in 2025. So if you are curious to see what I'm doing at any particular point, visit my website.
Thank you. And I will put all of your contact information in the description so that everyone can see. If for some reason anyone that is tuning in, if you can't find her, just let me know and I will make sure to direct you to connect you directly to and that way that way you can get, everyone can get what they need. Um, Thank you again so much for being on our podcast. I always love having conversations with you. I can't wait to have another conversation with you in the future. And everyone else, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the So Are We Doing Life? Listen, I can't even talk today. Let me try
This
that
is
again.
life.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the So Are We Doing Life podcast. Stay curious, stay honest, and keep doing life your way.